Hi, and welcome to today's discussion. I will be talking about what tools and software do project managers use. As a project manager, you will know that there are multiple tools, software that could be used. I'm not going to go into much detail of each one, but what I will give you is a basic overview and areas where you need to cover. So, uh, you know, the areas I will be covering is like project planning and scheduling tools, and then communication and collaboration tools, budget and financial tools, reporting and analytic tools, which I will cover throughout the project. So let's move on. And the first thing I want to really discuss is project planning and scheduling tools. As you know, as a project manager, you will need to do lots of project planning and scheduling just to understand where you are, how you're going to do things. And it's really, really important that project planning is done correctly with the right tools, because as an individual, you are not going to remember everything, and you need to make sure that you've got something to reference. Now, some of the tools that you've got, which is most people I know and who I've worked with, use Microsoft Project. There's other things like Trello, Basecamp. There's also, I mean, even simple things like an Excel spreadsheet to track and put all the schedule, your project planning and schedule tools. But I'm a great fan of MS Project. It has a lot of features, a lot of benefits. It's probably underutilized because there's so much to learn. And I've worked with a few people who are very, very proficient in MS Project, and it can be a very, very powerful tool. Um, Trello I've used, but more for sprint management, etc. I've used Kanban boards. I think there's one within Azure that I've used. There's one in AWS. There's all sorts that are out there for if you're doing agile work. But there's plenty of tools that you could use for project planning and scheduling. Next element really is the communication and collaboration, and I've covered this on other topics where communication is really key. And in today's day and age, we are in the environment of doing lots of remote work as well as in face to face, which is now coming back. But there are tools such as Microsoft Teams, Zoom. There's Google Meet. There's all sorts of tools out there that you could use for your communication and collaboration. As well as that, there's email, etc., documentation for Word, Excel, whatever tools you want to use to do all those things. But communication and collaboration. So communication wise, I would say use your Teams, use your chats, use your Zoom chats, use your Google Meet chats, whichever it may be. But then also back that up with proper emails. So you've got a history, you've got a record, even though everything's backed up. I do find that emails is better management than Teams because sometimes it's difficult to find. But it depends on the organization how they manage it, because you can make sure it's all interconnected with your SharePoint. Collaboration tools, again, I would say face to face is a really good one. I mean, people like people, but the environment has changed. The way we do things now is more over Teams. But again, you've got to have some sort of discipline with Teams and Zoom to make sure that you've got a good constructive meeting, that you do not waste time, or you are using that method to communicate very effectively. Again, make sure you've got your camera on. I do see a lot of Zoom calls where people are sat there with the camera off. Not seeing this individual's face is very, very difficult. So as a PM, there's something I would always recommend that you always ask for. They put the camera on because it helps you gauge people, helps you understand what they might be thinking. If it flags something, you see their face of disapproval, you can actually flag it. Start pulling information out. So it's really, really important that the tools you use for communication and collaboration are used to its most effective manner. But I would always say, back it up with documentation of some sort, like minutes. I know it's a little bit old-fashioned, but what it does do is make sure that there's a single point where we can reference, and that's the hard part, is where you've got multiple chats going. It's very difficult sometimes to track, especially for me anyway. The next element is budgeting and making sure that you've done all your budgets and your financial tools. Again, as you know, every project has a cost associated. You need to make sure you're managing that, making sure that you've done a good budget plan or understand where your costs are, what your resources are, what your expenses are, how much kit you're buying, etc. Um, and one of the things I have found is that the majority of the projects I've worked with, they do have a financial system, but it's a back end, it's a big clunky financial system that is used for managing the business accounts, not for project management. There are, tools you could use, and QuickBooks. I've mentioned, but I've never used it myself. But it can be used for financial, but I think that's more accountancy. There are, I've used Excel spreadsheets in the past. In many of the companies I've worked for, they've got their own internal financial management system which you can work with, and those financial management systems are really, really key. If you don't have a financial management system that you work with where you're tracking your expenses, resources, etc., MS Project is another good tool that you can use for financial tracking. But you need to be very, very detailed and understand the process of using that. Or you can simplify it, simply putting into an Excel spreadsheet and just managing that and tracking it through that. Again, holding your stakeholders accountable for all the financial costs and budgets. Really good tools is to monitor resourcing, how much stock you got in, etc. I use Excel all the time, and I think it's I'm comfortable with that, but there are other tools that are probably more efficient that need to be used, I would say. Next one is reporting and analytical tools. So as part of your project management, you need to somehow know where you are going. You need to report back to your stakeholders. What's your progress? How much, how good or bad are you doing? Budget, etc. There's multiple tools you can use. MS Project is a good one. I do find a nice simple slide deck, just covering it briefly, is very good. It references it, reminds you. Again, analytical tools, Excel. There's Power BI reporting that you can put in place. And I know when I was doing projects using Azure, there's tools with Azure that you could use. But for visualization, you can't beat a good old PowerPoint presentation. And for reporting, a nice little Excel extract which shows what you're doing. But these tools are all very, very important. Again, if you're like me as a contractor moving from project to project, every tool's different, and every method that the company wants you to use is different. In some projects, they don't even want you to manage budgets, which in my opinion is not good, because unfortunately you don't really know how it's done. And it depends where, how they do their financials, capex, opex, etc., all those things, EBITDA and all those things. And those are financial terms that a lot of financial guys throw at you, and I'll probably discuss in another video with you guys. But in summary, there are multiple tools out there, but for report, there's, you've got to understand the key stages for report planning. Use your MS Project, in my opinion. Communication, use the tools to your best advantage to gauge people. And I think in Teams or Zoom or whatever chat you do, make sure you've got the video on where possible, because it's going to help you massively engage with the end user or stakeholders. Unfortunately, we are in that environment where we are working remote, or fortunately, depending on how you like it. But it has its pros and cons, like with everything. Budgeting and financial, again, just make sure you're tracking it. There's always tools out there. Understand the company, whoever you work with, understand what they're doing. And then finally, your reporting, just make sure. I always like to report visually, but there's other ways. Engage with your senior stakeholders and get some clarity about what those reporting tools, and then use the best method. Historically, I've always used PowerPoint to do a summary on team meetings, and then followed it with a highlight report, which covers it in a little bit more detail. Hope you found that helpful. I will go into more detail in other videos about each tool. And thank you for listening today.